Hello, dear digital ship friends. We open the webinar, and while you're connecting, welcome to Vessel Performance webinar brought to you by Digital Ship. Today, we are discussing how you can improve vessel performance and voyages by advanced analytics. We have a great story about combining vessel models with weather for the best energy performance made possible by a new partnership between Weathernews International and Vessel Performance Solutions from Copenhagen. We are already connected to our guest speakers. Please welcome Christian Bendix Nielsen, Director and Owner at Vessel Performance Solutions, Amy Buell, Service Operation Leader at Weathernews, and her colleague Alexander Schroeder, Key Account Manager, also at Weathernews. We are starting off with Fiona MacDonald, the editor of VPO Global, who will set the scene for today's discussion. Fiona, on to you.
Thank you very much, Vida. So what we are going to be talking about today is the importance of understanding the impact weather has on ship performance. The ability to predict weather combined with the ability to analyse weather impact is essential in understanding how vessels operate and how to break down vessel consumption into weather impact, fouling, propulsion, and other consumption. Now, not only does weather affect the performance of a ship, but also the safety of the vessel, its cargo and crew. And every ship will be affected by weather at some point during its voyage. Strong winds and currents will affect some ships more than others, but regardless of ship type, it is a parameter that should always be considered when planning routes, speed, or even trim. However, despite the huge impact weather has on ship performance, it is often overlooked. Many shipping companies spend thousands on technologies to understand and improve ship performance, but many are also still not taking into account the impact weather has on their bottom line. In an effort to improve vessel and voyage performance and ultimately help shipping companies to save money, two companies have teamed up. Last month, they announced some huge news that will change the way weather data is used in vessel and voyage performance analysis. These two companies are Tokyo-based Weathernews and Danish company Vessel Performance Solutions. The duo have partnered to integrate weather data with ship performance data to enable better decision-making for ship operators around voyage planning and execution in support of lower cost, reduced emissions, and improved safety. During this webinar, we will hear from both Vessel Performance Solutions and Weathernews, clarifying how the combined service between the companies works and adds value. We will start with the two companies explaining their business, with focus on the services that are being integrated to better understand why an integration makes good sense. Our first speaker is Christian Bendix Nielsen, Director of Vessel Performance Solutions based in Copenhagen. Before co-founding VPS, he was head of hydrodynamics at Maersk Maritime Technology. Mr. Nielsen holds a PhD degree from the Technical University of Denmark, specialising in computational fluid dynamics. Then we will hear from Alexander Schroeder, Key Account Manager at Weathernews. He has an MSc in meteorology from the University of Hamburg and has worked at the Norwegian Meteorological Institute. Finally, we'll move over to the US to hear from Amy Buell, who is the Service Operation Leader at Weathernews. She joined Weathernews in 2004 as Voyage Planner, following completion of her MSc in Meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. As usual with digital ship webinars, we will have about 30 minutes of presentations followed by a Q&A session. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box on the screen, and please state who your question is for. And I think with that, I would like to invite our first speaker, Christian Bendix Nielsen from VPS, to give his opening talk.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Fiona, and thanks for the introduction, and of course also thanks for joining this seminar. My name is Christian Bendix Nielsen. I'm a Director and Owner of Vessel Performance Solutions, and I would like to briefly introduce our solution Vesper and explain a little bit about what it is that we do, how we derive decision support, and how we analyze operational data from vessels, and eventually also how that fits into what VNI is doing on the routing and voyage safety. So before I get started, I'll just explain a little bit about our company. We're based in just north of Copenhagen in Denmark, and we were founded in 2014. We have a web-based service called Vesper, which analyzes operational data from the ships, and we have approximately 1,000 vessels in our service. We have clients committed to significant savings of respectively 4% and 5% of the annual fuel costs. So that's a very significant saving in our opinion compared to the efforts done in analyzing vessel performance. So what we do is we analyze primarily the technical, but also the operational performance of vessels through data analysis and providing decision support. Of course, all that is in close dialogue and contact with the clients who's doing the actual work, but we are providing the analysis and decision support for this. And as mentioned, we have this close collaboration with the V&I, both with regards to weather and accessing weather, but of course also integrating our services. To the right, I have a little sketch of how this solution works and how conceptually it works. So it all starts from the vessel, of course, where we receive operational data and provide decision support and analysis with our platform. This goes to client office, who often takes the decisions or the actions required. That could be hull cleaning, paints, engine adjustments, or whatever, and does some action, and it all impacts the vessel again. And of course, we continuously monitor this process and this decision support. So I've taken up a couple of slides where just briefly conceptually explain how our service is built up by ship modeling, data interfacing, and the portal that we do for vessel analysis. So to briefly explain the ship modeling, one of our core competences is actually building ship models and building accurate ship models for the vessels in question, and calibrating and verifying those with the data. We have more than 600 models in our database covering in excess of 1,500 vessels. We have a lot of experience in building and deriving ship models and using that. We believe this is one of our core strengths in understanding ship performance, because we believe that the model-based approach is what gives by far the most reliable results when it comes to performance analysis. Next step is interfacing. So we interface to all sorts of data. It can be NUM data from V&I or other sources like Visa and Vestlink, or it can be autolog data such as Kongsberg or other system providers that gives autolog data. So normally we're not actually involved in the data collection process ourselves, but interface to the data from the clients and their preferred providers, and utilize that for our analysis. And as such, it's quickly and easy to get up and running with our service, and we can always get access to, or in most cases, get access to historic data, so we know something about the history of the vessel when we start the service. And the final is, of course, that we give access to the Vespa portal for analysis and decision support. And our portal and our decision support tool is, of course, large and contains a large number of elements that we can go into, but I've decided to focus, of course, on a few of them related to the hull and propeller performance, which is, of course, the most important part and the foundation. So you can see that's the technical performance side of things, how the vessel's paints perform, and how the decay of the vessel develops over time, especially when they're idling or operating for a long time. We provide accurate fuel table predictions as speed and consumption. I'll dig into the details on that a bit later. And we also deal with the compliance, so the regulatory compliance reports like IMO DCS or EU MRV, or in some cases we interface directly with verifiers for easy verification of data. And we're also doing a lot on crew feedback and giving vessel crews an insight into their performance. So I've decided to take out the three key points of our system that I'll describe in detail. But of course, we have a lot more, for instance, data validation as such, but I'll dig into some of the main outputs of the system and explain what it is that our system provides. So the first example is related to the hull performance, where what we do is we trend vessel performance over time and look at how it develops. So this is a classic chart of a vessel that's been operating for a long time. So it has many years of data, and we track the development of the main indicator that we have that we call added resistance. So it basically means what is the offset in resistance or in propulsion performance or propulsion power, the increase in that over time due to additional friction of the hull. So this is a traditional picture that we see. So when the vessel is in dry dock, it comes out very close to the baseline, or the close to how our you can see our optimal model looks like, and then it decays over time until we have events like a dry docking event or hull cleaning events. So we start our prediction over when we have these major events, and then of course we measure the impact of these events. And that can be the improvement over a dry dock, or could be the improvement of a hull cleaning. It is of course also relevant for retrofits or other major modifications of vessels where we believe it has an impact. So by this, you can actually not only trace what happens with the vessel, you can also try to quantify what is the impact of the efforts that you're doing with the vessel, and thereby trying to figure out, well, has it actually been beneficial to do hull cleans, for instance. We have very recent examples of vessels going into dry dock very close to, having a hull cleaning very close to the dry dock. Normally not something is done, something that's done because you say, okay, it's only a couple of months away, but actually you can make huge savings if the vessel is, you can say, is bad enough close to a dry dock and if the market is good. So we've seen examples of huge savings just months before dry docking if proper action is taken and for instance, cleaning the vessels. So that's what this kind of analysis will lead to. You can quantify and you can monitor. And of course, you can also identify how the vessel is performing right now, which is very critical to the interface that we do with VNI. So one of the outcomes of knowing the current performance of the vessel is, of course, that we can make an accurate fuel table prediction and provide that as a feedback. So this is an example of a fuel table. You can say we have the baseline running down here. That's the blue line. And the orange line is what we predict the current performance is of the vessel. And it's then overlaid with some recent noon data as a validation of how it looks. So this is a very standard output, and these models are of course useful not only for understanding the offset right now and the decay, but also in the operational systems such as IMOS or in the weather routing system of VNI to be able to predict accurate fuel consumption. Another example is voyage and charter party monitoring. I've just taken a brief shot of how our ongoing voyage report looks like. So you can monitor the fleet, and it's also possible to use this report to quantify the charter party consumption. So let's say you have a vessel with a given charter party and you're trying to monitor the voyage and trying to monitor the charter party. Well, this report will actually look at the ongoing voyages and break it down and see, am I within the limits of the current charter party? Or am I outside? And we do it in two ways. You can say we do it traditionally, where you monitor it against what is warranted in the charter party, but we also try to quantify against the charter party in percentages, not only on the given voyage, but also over the full charter party period. So you can say we try to identify, is it above or below the charter party? Is it 15% above, or is it 10% below? So that sort of quantification we can give irrespective of what instruction is given to the vessel. It doesn't need to have a warranted consumption or a warranted instruction. We can quantify it as well. We also use this to monitor instructions, and we use the AIS track and the planned route and can visualize that. A final example I have is the autolog and sensor data analysis. And this is something that we've worked a lot on recently because there's so much, you can say, increased interest in combining the noon data with a high frequency data solution. I brought an example of Kongsberg, but we also interface to a lot of other autolog systems. So the presence of the high frequency and the autolog data in itself is not so valuable because these high frequency signals often contains a lot of dynamics, which means that actually the scatter in your prediction becomes even higher than it would be with noon reports. However, through the ways that we apply the algorithms and utilizing what we call stable period detection, we're actually able to filter out data, find out when the vessel is in a stable condition, and utilize that as a sort of a performance test. So we try to detect on all these signals, when is the vessel in a stable condition, when can we utilize this data? So we average it over a period of time that could be 1 to 3 hours, and then we mark that as a stable period. This is illustrated with these red dots here, where all these present signals that can be observed: speed, heading, wind speed, wind direction, and power, just to take an example. So whenever they are stable, we utilize that as a performance prediction, and thereby we can utilize it as a performance test. And this gives us, of course, a lot more data than the traditional noon reports, and it also gives us higher quality data than the noon reports because it allows us to quickly detect the deterioration. So it gives a quicker response to a vessel that's off performance, and especially after an event that could be an idle period or it could be a dry docking, it gives a quicker response to detecting and being certain about the level of the vessel performance. So finally, I'd like to explain a little bit about our roadmap and what it is that we're working so much on right now. I'll just be very brief about it, but we're working a lot on the crew feedback side, trying to involve crews and give them some feedback on the data. We experienced that a lot of vessels they're used to reporting data, but they're not used to get a lot of feedback on the reports that they send into the office. And that's of course what we try to do with this, try to engage the vessels and show them what we can utilize the data for. And of course, also try to tell them how they can improve not only the data reporting itself, but also optimize the performance when they compare to, for instance, sister vessels or vessels on the same service. So by benchmarking and giving vessels insight into their own performance, we hope that we can motivate them and drive them to improve their performance. We work a lot on the digital twin, where we try to identify the best data sources. For instance, for wind, for vessel speed, for wind, wave, and currents, that we're utilizing VNI currently, and we're very happy with the data that they provide and giving us high resolution tracks. And when we combine it with, for instance, AIS data, then we can give a better and a more accurate modeling of the weather over, for instance, a noon report. We work a lot with RPM predictions, and as you will see in the interface to VNI, this is also important because they're utilizing the RPMs a lot in their instructions. And finally, we've done a lot on autolog data and integration. We work with voyages. As I showed previously, we do voyage monitoring, but we also try to simulate voyages, especially on the consumption side, and help do more accurate modeling of voyage consumption. So you can say we move more into the operational side. We work with advanced diagnostics, so we basically make the system diagnose itself. We've done a diagnosis of the ship speed log right now, where we can identify if the data that comes from the vessel from the speed log measuring the speed through water is accurate, and thereby helping to diagnose if the vessels are reporting properly or if the equipment is working properly. And finally, we're working a lot with compliance with the CII, UK MRV, and others, to complement what we already do right now with respect to compliance and the EU MRV and IMO DCS reports we already have. So I think this actually covers my presentation. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Christian. That was a very interesting presentation. I can see we already have some questions coming in for you. We're just going to move straight over to our second speaker now, and this is Alexander Schroeder, who is the Key Account Manager at Weathernews. Alexander, please feel free to share your screen when ready.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the intro. Yeah, I'm Alex, sitting here in Copenhagen in one of our branch offices of 32 offices worldwide of Weathernews, and we actually have also an operational department here in the office. But I'm on the commercial side, and my part of the talk will puts a little bit more on a conceptual level, the groundwork for the talk which Amy will cover, and that is the interface or the combination of OSR, our Optimum Ship Routing service, and Vesper service. So first of all, I would like to introduce a little bit on a key figure base Weathernews, and also where our foundation lies, and that is the weather data. So how weather data is generated, but also how it differs maybe to conventional methods. And then a short, and it's only 10 minutes, so it will only be a short introduction into our Optimum Ship Routing service and what it can do for your commercial management. So Weathernews, we are one of the big players in the market. We service not only, we're not providing only mere weather data, but we tailor our service into the needs of the market. 44 different industries in the road management, aviation, energy market, logistics. And the oldest sector is the marine, the shipping business, with more than 35 years of experience. As Weathernews, we have globally over 1,100 employees, of which 150 are meteorologists, supporting about 500 clients worldwide in the shipping industry, where we monitor together with our systems, monitor and service 10,000 vessels about 24/7. when we talk about our optimum ship routing service, which is one part of our wide service range of different items that we provide to the clients. But when we talk about the simulation engine, we need to talk about the weather data and how this is generated. And the next slide is quite busy, but it shows also the complexity of weather forecast data, weather analysis. And when we do weather forecast and weather analysis, we need two things. One is the model. We need a numerical forecast model with the computational infrastructure with it, but also we need the data feed. So the data, observational data that goes into the model as an initial condition, what we call the model assimilation. And Weathernews, maybe also different to other providers, is using what is publicly available. So from satellites and weather sensors, but also we use our own proprietary infrastructure with 2 satellites, weather sensors, radar systems, together with also reported data from vessels or aircraft data. And that is to fill the gap of where maybe observational data is sparse or non-existent. And that is especially over ocean where there's not a lot of measurements available. So therefore, ships data is very important, even though it's a very small percentage of the whole data set compared to maybe satellite data. But after doing a comprehensive quality check, it delivers very important information for the model assimilation. Then when we move into the analysis and the prediction of weather, Weathernews runs its own proprietary forecast model on a global scale, but also on a meso scale, regional scale. And that has the advantage to tailor and tweak the model depending on what you want to forecast and also the regional environment. And that together with also other model outputs from other agency, we create what we believe is the best marine output in the market. So that is then being used by our simulation engine, but also by our Voyage analysts when they do the service. So if you would like to hear more on this, it's a very complex slide with a lot of information. We can also discuss that maybe outside this meeting. But what can we do now to enhance the quality and also our service? And this is a project in progress. So Weathernews is now working on moving from deterministic forecast to more probability-based forecast. And in figure 1, this is a study, a sample for a coastal route east of Japan, where we take several model scenarios, so several model ones with different initial conditions, but also maybe different model parameterizations and tweaks. In this case, 50 runs, and we use that to make a statistical analysis, which you can see in figure 3, where you can see a significant wave heights and the different waypoints for that route. And you can see we have the deterministic blue value, that is a single value output. But then on top with the now probability-based forecast, we can also assess the range of how likely it is that this event takes place. And this brings voyage optimization and predictions to another level, which is beneficial for the technical or safety manager, but also on in-house when we do the voyage analysis. How can we further improve forecast methods? Artificial intelligence is a big topic. We also now in the progress of utilizing deep learning when doing downscaling from coarse grid model, this case a GFS model for wind, and we use high definition or high resolution analysis data, wind data, to learn, to make the algorithm learn through deep learning, to make a forecast output that is high in resolution, by with the results to reduce the error. So these are things in progress. There's a lot more, but certainly we cannot cover all in this meeting. But now going on to our optimum ship routing service, and this is a very fundamental and important slide. Safety is our utmost and #1 priority when doing the voyage analysis and voyage simulation optimization. Safety of the crew and the vessel and the cargo is utmost priority. And then as a second layer, we would do the optimization depending on the commercial needs. And what does this mean? We can give a recommendation for certain RPM settings or load setting or speed, good weather, speed setting to the vessel, depending on the voyage goals. So the service is tailored to each of the commercial objective of each of the voyage. Here's just a selection of some of them. And what we account for in this simulation and analysis is the weather and sea condition encountered along the most optimal route. So that is the predictive part. And then the other element we need for that optimization or simulation is the analytical part, and that is the vessel performance curve. So how is the vessel performance in certain weather conditions? And this is exactly the interface that Amy will cover in the next part. But before we move to Amy, I just wanted to also explain a little bit deeper, but still on a conceptual level, what we can do with our OSR service. And that is for each of the engine setting, RPM, or in this case, it's a speed setting, we can simulate and calculate consumed fuel oil consumption, either from start of sea passage to end of sea passage. And if we have the cost information, we can also make this as a cost plot. Here, the speed and the cost on the y-axis. And correspondingly, we can also calculate an ETA for different speed or RPM settings. And that means that we can, together with the higher weight, we can also make a higher cost curve, which adds up to the total curve, where we have then different, depending again on the voyage goal, we can meet the requirements of the commercial management, least cost being here the minimum of this curve, but we can also do on-time arrival, so we can support the master to arrive on time, minimizing early arrival and avoiding late arrival. So there's a full range of commercial decision-making support. And now transiting over to Amy, as I said, bringing together this predictive and the analytical part of Vesper and OSR is now covered by Amy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Yes, as you mentioned, we'll go straight over to Amy now. She is the Service Operation Leader at Weathernews. Please feel free to begin when you're ready, Amy.
Great, thank you very much, Fiona, and thank you, Alexander and Christian. My name is Amy Buell. I'm the Service Operation Leader at Weathernews. I'm sitting here in our office in Oklahoma, which is where our main operational office is here in the US, but I work closely with our colleagues in Copenhagen, as well as all over the world, to ensure the quality of the services we provide. So piggybacking on what Christian and Alexander have already discussed, I'd like to talk about kind of how this collaboration is intended to work practically and how we've been managing it. So in terms of what Weathernews is bringing to the table, of course, on the VPS side of things, there's the quality of the analytics. But in terms of Weathernews core competencies, there are two core competencies that we offer. One is the value of our weather data, which Alexander just talked about, as well as our simulation engine. So how we can do predictions. So the Weathernews simulation engine takes a ship-specific model with relationships between speed and RPM and fuel consumption and RPM to calculate vessel performance and behavior at each DR position basis forecast weather conditions. So you can see in this graphic, this is an example of a voyage simulation. On the left-hand panels, you can see the weather conditions, the forecast weather conditions. So wind, wave, encounter period, and currents. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the voyage simulation information with respect to fuel consumption, RPM, speed, and speed reduction. So the various lines that you're seeing in the speed reduction there are the speed reduction due to various weather components. So this is an example of a steady RPM simulation. The dots are the DR positions. And you can see that the RPM remains steady, but when the vessel encounters rough weather towards the end of the voyage, you'll see that both the speed will decrease and commensurately the fuel consumption will increase due to the vessel encountering those rougher conditions. Now, of course, this is a steady RPM example. We also have the ability to, for example, simulate for a constant load. So in that case, you would see the fuel consumption line would be steady and the RPM and speed would then vary. The relationships between speed, RPM, and fuel consumption and weather conditions are developed for the ship-specific parameter via statistical methods. So correlating slip to weather conditions basis vessels reports to identify the calm sea performance basis RPM and draft, and the speed reduction due to the weather components. The performance of the vessel is essential for voyage planning. So this is a key aspect of the voyage planning process. Now, as I mentioned, the model that we use, the baseline model that we use here at Weathernews is a statistical approach. And that's effective insofar as it's practical, it's flexible, and it's reproducible. The barrier to entry is low. All we need is a little bit of data, and we can even create at least a good guess model with just basic speed, RPM, and FOC inputs. However, as the case with any statistical model, the model is only as good as the data in it, which can be a drawback in situations where perhaps there may be parts of the vessel's performance where there's not adequate data. So in the case that we have a lot of data, or the portions of the curve where we have a lot of data, the simulation will be very good. But in situations where maybe there's data that's lacking, that simulation might be a little less accurate. And we also have the challenge of when the data is no longer relevant anymore. So an example is a dry docking situation. So we might have lots and lots of good gathered data, but once the vessel goes into dry dock, that data isn't relevant to the vessel's performance anymore. On the other hand, VPS, as Christian detailed earlier, uses a marine engineering approach. So developing a naval architecture model to understand the full range of the vessel's performance, and then understanding things like added resistance to understand how the vessel's performance is changing over time. The main drawback here is the barrier of entry is much higher. It can sometimes be difficult to get the necessary physical data to build the model, but more importantly, it requires marine engineering expertise to understand how added resistance can be identified and understood and then applied in a practical manner. So what this collaboration is seeking to do is take those analytical strengths from VPS with respect to the vessel performance and WNI's core competency of weather forecasting and voyage simulation and put them together. So VPS develops a naval architecture based speed and fuel model, gathers and filters the data to understand how the actual performance compares to that ideal performance. And that can help, as Christian already mentioned, identifying things like when it's appropriate to do hull cleanings or the effect of certain interventions on the vessel's performance. Weathernews takes a vessel model and simulates speed and consumption based on the forecast weather conditions to identify the ideal route and RPM or speed to achieve the business targets for the voyage and compare against expectations for vessel performance. So what we're doing in this integration is VPS can provide the calm sea relationships for speed, fuel consumption, and RPM, including the added resistance, basis their analysis, and draft dependence to WNI, which we then use as the data for the baseline of the relationship. Then the OSR uses that as the baseline relationship to do the simulation, which predicts the vessel performance in the forecast weather conditions for the weather risk analysis. So what this does is combines two solutions for consistency between the performance analysis and the vessel operations for more consistent decision-making for the voyage operation, but it also has a knock-on effect related to decarbonization targets. So where VPS is supporting identifying interventions to improve vessel efficiency, OSR can then support reducing CO2 emissions through voyage optimization. So we have an example, a case study of this kind of collaboration in work in process. So this is a voyage from Brazil to Mexico. Vessel was loaded with an instructed speed. So this is an instructed speed priority as opposed to other types of business priorities. What you're seeing on the left-hand side is the cost sheet that was sent to the operator with the initial voyage plan prior to the vessel's departure. So Alexander had that nice graphic of seeing how the various targets can be visualized with respect to cost conditions. And this is kind of that in play, but in numbers. So what it's showing you is the assessment of the sailing time and fuel consumption through various settings of the operational range of the vessel, so the operator can understand which speed or RPM target will minimize the underway costs. So in this case, the speed instruction was 13.3 knots. However, the master indicated that they intended to sail at 93.8 RPM for that speed instruction in the next voyage information that was provided to us prior to departure. Now, as a matter of procedure, one of the things we found to make our simulations more accurate is to use the master's intended RPM in these types of situations where there is an instructed speed, because that's often going to be a more accurate representation of what the vessel's actually going to do. It's also true when the vessel's underway. So in this case, basis that 93.8 RPM, what we did is what we can do through this. In this example, you can see the right-hand side is the speed and RPM and speed and fuel consumption curves from Vesper. So the top is speed and RPM. The bottom is speed and FOC. And you can see for 93.8 RPM, very close to that, 93.6, corresponds to 13 knots, not 13.3, but 13 knots in terms of this vessel's performance. So taking that information for that RPM and then finding the calibrated consumption for 13.8 knots, you can see that both of those values are now represented in the W&I simulation model prior to departure. Now, this shows a comparison of that initial cost sheet. So this is the full thing, not cropped, but you can see the entire cost sheet here. And in the lower left-hand side is the results from the voyage audit report. So this is comparing what we simulated prior to departure to what actually happened using the VPS model. Now, this happens to be a particularly good example because for this port rotation, for those of you who might be familiar with it, the weather conditions along this route tend to be fairly good, but also quite steady. So favorable for a vessel sailing from Brazil to Mexico, mainly following conditions, but also very favorable currents. So because of that lack of variability, the likelihood of prediction is going to verify, but it makes a really nice example, and you'll see here in a second. So the initial predicted average speed, because of those very favorable currents and the favorable weather conditions, was 13.6 knots. You can see in the voyage audit report, the actual voyage average speed was 13.55 knots. You can also see that the good weather performance speed was assessed at 13 knots. And in this case, I checked and I can tell you that the master did indeed sail the 93.8 RPM for the entire voyage. So we can see that relationship between the RPM and the speed playing out in this example. Additionally, with respect to fuel consumption, you can see that the initial prediction was 411.5 metric tons for the whole voyage. Well, actually verified was 406.4 metric tons, and similarly with respect to the daily consumption, 24.7 based on the Vesper model, and then the actual consumption was about 24.3 metric tons. Just as kind of a side note, you can see that the initial ETA calculation, the vessel arrived within about 2 hours of that. So this is really a pretty special example, but you can see firstly how the data from VPS can be integrated into the W&I simulation model, but it also shows the value of the RPM style of simulation that we can do to increase the accuracy of the simulation, as well as the accuracy of the weather data that we have in our system. Finally, this is kind of a simple overview of how the whole system works together. So we receive reports from the vessel. In this diagram, they're going to Weathernews. It's also appropriate for them to go to VPS, depending on kind of what the situation is for that particular customer. But in this example, you'll see the reporting data comes in from the vessel. And then Weathernews then passes that weather data and report data to VPS. VPS performs their analytics, which are provided to the customer via Vesper, which Christian just discussed, but we also get the fuel table. That fuel table then is used in the WNI simulation engine and can be used for the OSR content that is then provided to the operator and the master. So this is super high level, really only scratching the surface of how we do what we do, but I hope this gives you an idea of kind of how this integration is working in real life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. That was a very interesting presentation. We're just going to move straight on to our Q&A session now. So we have some questions coming in, and we'll just start with quite an easy question. And this is, for companies already using both services, will there be any additional cost to use the service? Christian, do you want to answer this one?
I can quickly answer that. No, there's no additional operational costs required to this. In some cases, it required that we expand the ship model that we built to include these RPM predictions, but the operating costs are exactly the same as they were before. We have APIs that gives a lot of access to the data, and that includes fuel tables and RPM predictions for VNI. So no, there's no additional costs for you can say for joint clients.
Mm-hmm. And as far as sort of we can tell, this seems like this is a solution that VPS is delivering services to Weathernews only. Is Weathernews delivering any services to VPS as well? Maybe Alexander or Amy, you want to answer this one?
Yeah, I can comment on this. As I think we mentioned, like on a small detail, that we also deliver weather data, hindcast data, analysis data to Vesper system for them to do the analysis. So because the base is QRT or noon report data, that is obviously affected on certain weather conditions. And in order to make an analysis, you also need to know what are the weather conditions that data was reported in. And this is hindcast data from our side, together with the ocean current data.
So we have a question here, and this is from Tobias Groger, and the question is, in the same way as you ingest data into your VPS system, do you also share data back into third-party systems such as Kongsberg or Wiesen? Christian, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. Yeah, I can say in general we do that. So the two companies in question is of course has a lot of stories. I can say with Wiesen we're working a lot with automating this integration. A lot of our clients are utilizing the Wiesen and the IMOS platform for the operational purposes, and our fuel tables requires updating that. Today it's actually a manual process that most of our clients has to go through and update these systems, because the same fuel tables we provide to VNI also makes sense to utilize in, for instance, the operational system like IMOS. So we're actually working on automating that and saving the client's time. But it's, so that's actually something on our roadmap within the next, I would say, 3 to 4 months. We hope to have that in place. Regarding Kongsberg, today it's a one-way connection, meaning that we pull the data from Kongsberg, but actually as our collaboration develops with Kongsberg, it could be possible that they also pull data the other way. In general, I would say we have a very open system. We have a lot of APIs and a lot of endpoints. So many of our clients are utilizing our system together with own BI solutions where they can pull data and analysis and utilize that internally, especially when they want to combine the performance data with other types of data internally in-house. So that could be financial data or safety data or other aspects of data. So many clients utilize this, and today we think that's the way the BI you could say the BI process works in many companies, it is desired to have a quick access to this kind of data and integrate that. So we try to accommodate this with having an open system allowing access externally.
Thanks, Christian. So another question here, and this is about climate change, from Malcolm Willingale. It says, due to the impact of climate change, is weather forecasting far more challenging today, or do we have much better forecasting tools and data to help achieve greater accuracy? Amy, do you want to start with answering that one?
Sure, yeah, that's a bit of a big question, so I'll do my best. Climate change, the climate is changing, and we are seeing that. We can see that in terms of, when we're dealing with weather forecasts. In terms of the actual challenge of weather forecasting, one of the benefits that we have, particularly now with respect to technology, is the advent of using AI and deep learning on weather. So that's a trend that you're seeing in weather forecasting right now. And in terms of the challenge associated with how the climate is changing and how weather conditions are then changing as a result of the climate forcing, that allows us to have some more ways nor tricks in our toolbox to improve the weather forecasts. The biggest challenge with weather forecasting, especially for marine weather forecasting, is observational data. So terrestrial forecasting is a bit easier because there's typically a good amount of observations available by instrumentation that's been installed. That doesn't exist over the ocean. And so improving the observational data is also really valuable for improving weather forecasting, especially when the kind of climate forcings are changing in terms of how those affect the actual weather conditions. It's a short answer for maybe a big question, but hopefully that fills it in. I don't know, Alexander, if you have any comment as well.
Yeah, I think you covered it quite well, and it is indeed quite a big question. And I would say definitely yes, it is a challenge, and especially when we talk about the impact of the climate change. So whatever is connected on a safety point of view, and also commercially. So that is from a broader perspective, I guess from a safety manager or commercial manager, a challenge. But this is where Weathernews supports the mitigation and the decision-making support. And when we talk about forecasting tools, one fact that I actually missed to mention is that we have quite a big department of 84 people in our forecast center, constantly working on improving the methods, the algorithms, also the measurement of data. So what other observational data can we use and utilize to assimilate, and therefore also to improve the forecast methods. So yeah, it's so to answer the first bit, yes, it is definitely more challenging, especially when looking at the impact and the consequence. But again, that's what Weathernews is specialized in, to support and to mitigate those effects.
Great, thanks both. So we have a question here. This looks to be quite a technical question. It is from a tanker operator at V Ships. And the question is, speed and cons matrix, they put in brackets fuel table, for a certain BF4 or 5, which one to use tech/ship performance tables or graphs on board from shipyard/WNI, and how to download at the time of fixing and where to get it from. Does that question, are you able to answer that question, or perhaps you can discuss later if not? This one is, he said, directed it towards Amy. Sure,
yeah. Let me do my best for it. So with respect to at least the WNI simulation engine, and when we're using fuel consumption curves from other sources, what we actually want is the COM-C relationship. So rather than Beaufort 4, Beaufort 5 sort of good weather type of relationship, we want the COM-C, because the WNI simulation engine actually then adds in those weather effects. So that's what we're looking for, is those COM-C curves to do our simulations. With respect to, in terms of, I'm not completely sure about the download time aspect of the question, But in terms of getting that data, it can be provided prior to departure, and we can use that information to fairly quickly create a parameter equation to then ingest into our simulation engine. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And then another one just for WNI here is, does WNI simulation engine simulation also provide different routes, or only simulation speed on a predefined route?
Yep, definitely. So when we talk about voyage optimization, that is what OSR does. That is one of our core competencies. So although the example that I showed here is a very simple example, one route, it is when we are developing an initial voyage plan, and also while the vessel's underway, we're consistently evaluating many voyage options, depending on what the weather conditions and the forecast conditions actually are for the future voyage. So we can simulate many options, and we also have the ability to do speed allocations and RPM allocations in order to do kind of a speed adjustment. So for example, if there's heavy weather along the suggested route or the route that the vessel's on, there's options to adjust the route itself to avoid those conditions, but there's also options to adjust the speed of the vessel, speeding up or slowing down to avoid those conditions. And so when we are developing routes, both pre-voyage and while underway, we're looking at all of those possibilities to see what is going to be the most optimal option in that case.
And we've got one here from Jacob Hicks. He is involved in advanced modeling at Maersk. He says, thank you very much for the interesting presentations. One for Amy is, what approach to use in finding scalable routes? And a follow-up question for Amy and Christian is, how accurate are your models? Are you given RPM? How accurately can you predict speed?
Okay, let me just jump in on the scalable routes. So we have a voyage database that goes back many years. Weathernews has been around for a long time, and we have all of that data available to us. So we have that information, as well as typically sailed routes, charts, those types of things that can allow us to understand what's navigable. And then in terms of the weather forecast itself, we're of course simulating the voyage against the weather forecast conditions in order to visualize how the voyage will compare to the various options, and go through all of those evaluations to determine which one is the most appropriate based on what the specifics of the vessel are themselves. So that includes the vessel size, the cargo, if the cargo is particularly sensitive, or if there are other issues that we need to be aware of, as well as restricted areas and whale zones and those types of things as well. Those are all things that we can take into account when we're developing our voyage plans.
Maybe I can quickly add to that about the accuracy of the RPM models. Local elections are coming up in Denmark, so I have to give a real politician answer. That actually depends. So we'd like to say we're good at modeling, and we do good modeling of ships. If we have a good description of the ship, we are quite accurate at modeling it. Often we calibrate it with data, as we've explained. So if the data that we have received is of good quality, yes, we calibrate it well. The examples Amy showed was actually examples of a vessel where we had no data in any way predicted quite accurately the speed and RPM and fuel consumption tables. I would say in general we're good at it. Of course, there are times where we get misled by really bad data reported by vessels, but in general we are good at it. The accuracy, I don't know exactly what to say about the accuracy. Is it within 1 or 2 RPMs that we can predict the voyage? It's probably in that order of magnitude. And I saw a previous question actually, Fiona, but I think maybe should we pick that one up?
Yes, this question about the data collected for each vessel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the one I mentioned. Can data collected for each particular vessel be used for proposing good performance amongst the list of vessels? And I would say this is actually one of our core outputs of the system, that is assessing vessels' performance and benchmarking them, and thereby figuring out which vessel is good or bad. And of course, you can say there's different aspects to it. Is it on a given voyage, or is it general assessing of the vessel performance? But you can say the mathematics and the analytics is the same. So with operational data, yes, we're definitely able to benchmark and find good performers.
Christian, earlier in your presentation, you talked a little bit about data filtering. Could you just comment on how how you do that and how you sort of identify the good from the poor quality data?
Yeah, there's many aspects we do when we assess vessel performance. A standard way of filtering data is, of course, looking at the data itself, finding out when it's bad weather, we avoid using that as calibration data and filter that out. We do a lot on data validation to ensure that the data quality is good. We do a lot of checks on the data, and especially since we have in our opinion, a good ship model and can have the expectations of how a vessel performs, we can compare the data to that, and we can quantify if the data quality is good or bad. And we do a lot of effort in trying to give easy access to understanding and quantifying this data quality. And many of our clients feel that this is one of our strongest points because it's very easy to get an overview and you get tangible insights into what is the actual data quality provided by the vessels. And of course, that it all starts there, because when the data is really bad, then you might have to you could say use rougher means, or you have a bigger uncertainty in your predictions. So we work a lot with trying to assess data quality and also assessing predictive reliability of our performance of the ships.
Mm-hmm. And we have another question here about weather, and this is, so a vessel sailing already in rough weather develops a malfunction and is further forced to slow down. How best we eliminate weather factor when on a time charter, additional time and fuel cost claim is received? Amy, do you want to take this one?
Yes, so I think what this is maybe referring to, and actually this might be a question for Christian, is talking about identifying good weather performance and taking the good weather performance out from the actual weather performance to understand performance against the charter party details versus the actual weather conditions. So I think this is more under the scope of that. I don't know, Christian, if you want to.
Yeah, I can say in our way of determining vessels against the charter party, one of the things we do take into account is actually the actual speed the vessel is going. So to give an example, a vessel has been instructed to go 13 knots. It has a malfunction. It can only do, let's say, 10 knots or 9 knots. Well, actually, in the way we quantify against the charter party, we take that into account. We find out based on the charter party, what will the expected consumption be at those 9 knots, take out the weather effects, and then they quantify it. So yes, we can do that, and we do that as part of our service. I believe that answers the question.
Just one here for Alexander, and this is with the coming EEXI and CII regulations, ship speeds might be decreased. Thus, the current will become more important. Alexander announced that WNI is working on interpolation techniques to get current estimation. I see this point as very welcome. Would WNI publish how better are those results compared to traditional interpolation? Is it cross-checked for positions on major routes where shallow oceanic current occurs?
Yeah, that is quite a comprehensive question, and there's the decarbonization and regulation part of it that becomes more and more relevant and already taking place with the data measurement and data collection, and then the mitigation strategies. And in terms of ocean currents, I would need to think a little bit more on if it becomes more relevant. But what we can say is with the new methods that we are implementing, there will be an enhancement in the accuracy, and we are also happy to share the study outputs and share the outcome of this. So
can I add to this question, actually, because I think the question is put in the context of the EEXI and the CII, and of course, if you slow down, the weather impact has in percentage a bigger impact on the vessels. However, the CII doesn't care about how the weather has been doing, so you could say indirectly, the vessel is penalized even harder for bad weather if it slows down. But of course, you get the benefit of actually slowing down when there's less propulsion. So you get more sensitive to the weather, but at the same time, you are saving something per nautical mile because you're going slow. So yes, you do expose yourself a bit more, but because you're slow steaming, you will most likely improve your CII and thereby you can say the potential impact of these regulations.
Well, we're just coming up to the hour now, so if we start sort of wrapping up, and just wondering if anyone would like to add any final comments or closing remarks, really. Christian, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, well, I can only say that we've ever since we started our company and started diving deep into vessel performance, we've found that these two services of weather routing, voyage optimization, and vessel performance belongs very well together, right? It's two sides of the same coin. It's trying to gather data, understanding vessel performance, and utilizing that to predict what happens in the future. So that's why we're extremely happy about this collaboration, because in my opinion, it brings together two services, and two very important services in the daily life of vessel operators, that belongs tightly together. And we've started to close this, you could say, this gap there is between actually modeling the performance of the vessel and doing the route and the safety optimizations of the vessel. So we're very happy about this collaboration and this opportunity, and we definitely see that we do believe that this is the way the industry will go going forward.
Amy, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think Christian summed it up very nicely. I think when you have a core competence and the thing that you're really good at, and finding other people that can provide, complementary core competencies and creating a solution that works together is a really interesting approach. And it's something I'm really enjoying about this kind of trend in the market. So I'm looking forward to working more closely with BPS as well as others to find good solutions for our customers.
Thanks, Amy. Alexander, anything to close on?
Yeah, maybe very briefly, and I think Christian and Amy already said it. Vessel performance analytics, and voyage optimization with the predictive aspect of it go hand in hand. And this collaboration and combination of solutions enhances also the consistency, which helps on many aspects, on the decision-making support, on taking action once you have made the findings, and make the right conclusion and mitigation of it. So yeah, it goes hand in hand.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for all three of you speaking today, and thank you for everyone that has tuned in. And Vida, I'll hand back to you for final remarks.
Well, I would like to thank our audience who spared this hour with us. Our speakers packed it with the in-depth advice, the knowledge that they gained over the genuine work practice over years. And we hope you will manage to apply some of these thoughts into your operations. And we will share the recording with you over the email, including the bonus, a recording of a previous webinar that we filmed with VPS in April. It has a very interesting case study of transforming performance data into decision support, very much relevant for today's discussion as well. So Digital Ship is signing off. Take care. Bye.